from there, I'm going to pass the microphone over to John and Bill, who are going to begin our session.
Awesome. Thanks, Leanne. Welcome, everybody. Hi, Bill.
Hey, John. How you doing?
Good. We didn't talk about this, but while we go forward, I'll run slides and think, can you watch the chat and then just stop me if there's relevant things as we go? And
sure.
And everybody, why don't we, it's just us, so let's interrupt, stop, do whatever, kind of in context, because it's the whole point of this is to share, to help. And so stop us if there's anything that would be helpful. And then Bill, you and I will just frickin' frack as we go, huh?
That sounds good.
So I think if I do that, the video gets big. Is that what just happened?
I think so.
Or it's not a video, it's just a little screen. So I have to go to a different session or a different screen to make this work. So you just stop me because I can't see you anymore. But I'm going to jump in. So this is, as Leanne was saying, this is a session about Agile Scenarios. So essentially, what are they? How would you use them? Why would you use them? And some examples, and kind of make this a tool that you can run with. So to give you a little bit of a background here, we'll just go kind of in the context of the world we're living in right now. So fundamentally, fortunes are made and lost in crisis. We all know that. I mean, that's how the Googles of the world come out of crisis. And the truth of the matter is that when things are in crisis and completely in chaos, scenarios are the way to deal with it. The problem is, in their truest form, they're so cumbersome, they're almost impossible for startups to use. And so what we set out to do was create a really pared down version that works when you're really, really agile and moving fast. And that's what Recast is all about. And what we're going to do today is a quick background into Agile Scenarios themselves. Then we're going to review an output, like an actual, here's one from an actual session, which you might even find interesting. And then let's just spend some time, kind of rubber hits the road, this reality out there. Where do we really use them? What kind of things do we run into? What are the advantages? How do you use these to build value in your company? And so we got Q&A at the end, but I think we should run Q&A all the way. So just stop us if there's anything. So I'll start with a really, really, really high level look at kind of where we're at and where this fits. So the COVID crisis is transformational. And people throw that word around, but it actually means it's a force of disruption that is going to change some things forever, but not everything. And the reality is that the companies that nail this, that get it right during crisis and are quick out of the gates, they're going to thrive. And the ones who don't, well, not so much. So Bill and I we collaborate on a number of things together, but I'm doing a bunch of the talking up front. So who the heck am I? I'm a strategist. I work with very innovative, transformative companies to help them with their strategy. And when I was putting this together, I was thinking, look at that, I'm 8 crisis old. And I ran companies through 5 of them. And in reality, that doesn't make me an expert at all, but it does give me a sense of signal from noise. And when I kind of look through that lens and I go to a really high level, there's some sort of first principles at play here. So the first thing is, after experiencing a bunch of crises, what I know for a fact is the world will never go back from being in triage to being normal again, or at least what we thought of as normal before it happened. And I also know that there's always a period of adjustment that takes place before things kind of settle out, or what we'll call next normal. And this reset, this period of adjustment, this is actually where fortunes get made. When you are an entrepreneur, this is gold. This is like extreme sports for business leaders. And one of the things that you just have to get used to is you can't actually get rid of the uncertainty. As an entrepreneur, you just have to confront it. It is uncertain. That's the point. And when you think of it being just flat out uncertain, clearly a rigid plan is not going to work. But the notion of no plan, that doesn't work either. And so what people who've been through a lot of crises come to is the use of scenarios. And it's just because they actually work really, really well in times of uncertainty. That's what they're built for. And they really work because nobody actually knows how it's going to turn out. And because when you jump past the reset period, the ones who win are the ones who got it right. But what does that mean? It means like you're the fastest to learn how things are changing and unfolding, and the fastest to change and adapt with it, and to iterate your trajectory and what you're working on. And in fact, it's not about getting it right. It's about a whole series of iterations that get you closer and closer to next normal, so that you're just way ahead of the curve. It's not that there's some magic moment where you got it all figured out. It's just inch by inch getting closer. And scenarios help a lot, but the problem is they're wildly complex if you do them at their kind of highest level. And so what Recast was about was an agile approach, a really, really fast, zero cost, you can do this yourself, an instantly actionable approach to this. So take the best of scenarios, but make it a startup agile type of an approach. Not about huge planning meetings. It's not about getting the right answer. And it's not about debating which scenario is most likely. It's actually about going through the scenarios and kind of getting there mentally, and you'll see why in a second. So we did this session under Recast. Recast isn't even a company. It's an open license version of Agile Scenarios. If you go to the site, it's got how-to and support materials and all kinds of stuff, and you can do it yourself and you don't have to pay. So how does that work? If we run an Agile Scenario session, how does it actually go? So this is like, I'm being really pragmatic here. If you end up wanting to do this, here's the steps, right? So step one is assign an owner. Maybe it's you, doesn't have to be you. Somebody on the team needs to just own, hey, we're going to do this. So planning and organize the meetings, if they're able, facilitate the discussion itself and create a post-session artifact. And it's important to pick somebody because somebody needs to own that those things are going to happen, so you don't have to worry about it. And then either on your own or as a group, pick a topic. Because in the end, you can't do how's the world going to unfold. You pick very specific topics that really matter to you. And that's what you focus on for a scenario. And you know, if there are multiple topics you need to work through, you would do them one at a time. So to give you an example, what's that mean, a topic? Well, here's a topic, the one on conferences and events, okay? So prior to the COVID crisis, conferences and events were really pretty much personal, in-person affairs. The premise is COVID's going to radically change that. That's it. That's the topic. And then where we're going to land is a pessimistic, optimistic, and realistic scenario about how that might happen. So you're picking these very specific things. And by the way, I'm showing you that topic, but we're actually going to show you an output from a scenario on that topic so that we work with a common thread all the way through here. So we picked a person for the process, and we've picked a topic. Now we need a time frame, meaning scenario in what, 100 years? You know, in a week? No, you need to pick a time frame that makes sense. We typically use a 2-year window, but you can adjust that. You can do 18-month or whatever you feel. So now we've got everybody together. We're going to have our scenario session. I've seen them go as fast as an hour. I would advise allowing 2 hours. 90 minutes, pretty common. But it depends whether you struggle or how rich the conversation is. And what you're going to do as a group is you're going to end up with 3 separate scenarios: optimistic, pessimistic, and realistic. And you can use the strategy canvas. So this Recast canvas is available at the Recast site, or you can use a whiteboard, or you can use a wall. It's entirely up to you. But what we're going to do is capture everything in one place and ultimately turn it into an artifact of the scenario. And there's a bunch of reasons why you want to do that, which I'll talk about in a minute. Okay, so you're all in the room, you got the topic. You maybe want a little chat about the topic so everybody's clear. And now you're going to spend the first 10 or 15 minutes doing an optimistic scenario, or that's what I would suggest. I often start with optimistic because a really easy way you can go about it is to go, well, how was it before the crisis? And that's probably as optimistic as we could get. And then let's, adjust for if it went as close to the way it used to be as possible, what would that look like? And that's one way to get to an optimistic scenario. But the point is to start to break it into individual bullet points, things you think will be true, and have some discussion about those. And then once you finish your optimistic and you're really just capturing bullet points, I would recommend you do the pessimistic. But you can do these in a different order. But the idea is to go to the extremes. So, and again, 10 or 15 minutes, you're going to find many of the points from your optimistic scenario show up here, but probably the opposite. You're like, well, if in an optimistic scenario, there's going to be a vaccine and we're going to be able to travel. Well, in a pessimistic scenario, probably there's no vaccine and we can't travel, right? So they tend to be almost polar opposites. But again, in talking about the points, what you're trying to do is drive discussion. Like, yes, you'll land on something, but it's actually about the discussion. That's really where the value comes from. So this is kind of what we would call bracketing. What we're trying to do, let's say we're a half hour into our session. What we've really done is talk about the two extremes of what might happen. Do we know they're going to happen? No, we don't know. We're trying to get a group view of what do we think might take place here. And I like to start with best case because it's a little more optimistic. And if you start with worst case, things can spiral into a very dark place. But sometimes you have to. Sometimes that's where the group's head is at, and that's where you got to start. But the key is we bracket the extremes, and then we're going to move to what we actually think might happen. But the bracketing really helps with that because we push all the way out to these extreme possibilities, but mentally we're already kind of playing the game of, yeah, but that's not how it's going to turn out. It's going to be like this. So that's the steps, right? And we usually spend a little more time on the realistic scenario. And frankly, what I recommend is before you even jump into the realistic, we've already bracketed with pessimistic and optimistic. I like to take a few minutes, really 10 minutes or less, just to do a little individual brainstorming on, well, okay, we've kind of bracketed this thing. What are some of the disruptive forces that I see unfolding that might actually impact this? 1, 2, 3 bullets each. And try to bring them all together where everybody just kind of shares what their bullets are. So what do I mean by a disruptive force? I mean, you might go things like the rapid adoption of virtual meeting tech, or rapid progress of virtual reality, or so these like big things that are unfolding that are going to disrupt the status quo. And it's useful to do that about here because it kind of gets you out of your box a little bit in case any of these are really relevant, in particular to how you really believe it's going to unfold. And when everybody reports their 2 or 3 bullets, it's good if they give a little explanation, a couple sentences, a paragraph worth of, here's what it is, here's why I think it might impact us. And don't dwell on it. That's kind of good enough. It'll get you out of your box. And then it's time to get into the realistic scenario. And I think you're going to find, if it's like most of them, some things pull from optimistic, some things pull from pessimistic, but then the conversation tends to blossom and some things come right out of left field. And you're, again, just capture them in bullet points. You can flesh it out later. And again, it's really all about having this discussion. And again, you can use any tool you like, but this is an example of a board when we're finished. You can see in the optimistic, there's a series of almost like Post-it notes that are bullet points of things that made it into how our optimistic view or our pessimistic view or our forces. And then the blue is, okay, let's unpack realistically. How do we really think this thing's going to unfold? And so a couple sort of minor points, and then we're going to actually show one. So one minor point is this is a snapshot in time. When you do this, you don't know how it's going to turn out. And frankly, you're probably not even right. But the idea is to put some people around the table whose opinion you really respect, who would maybe have varying sort of inputs and a varying voice, and try to land on collectively talking this thing through and kind of imagining all the possible outcomes and imagining where you really think it'll land. And that's as of that moment in time, and you totally know that later you're going to adjust it, but there's huge value to talking about it now because it really short circuits how quickly you're able to sense and adjust as things go. So there you go. You got your scenario. You've had your discussion. What comes next? Well, the first thing is it's entirely possible some things came out of that discussion that you really should make some adjustments for on your execution roadmap. Sometimes it's some risks and opportunities, and sometimes there's a specific tactic or something that you decide you want to share or change right away, or a specific possibility you want to do a little more research on. But obviously that's step one, right? Do you need to tweak your execution in any way? Step two, believe it or not, is to put this in a form that you could share and actually share it. And I know you're not right, but it's actually quite amazing when you begin to share this kind of thinking with other stakeholders in your world. And when I say other stakeholders, sometimes even investors, even customers, certainly employees, certainly potential hires. And you can do it for a bunch of reasons. But one is kind of to position yourself that you are putting the effort in to get ahead of the curve. And that's got interesting implications for how you're perceived. Another, you might actually help people. And it does build confidence on a team, but mostly it sparks all kinds of useful discussions about the assumptions you're making, not your conclusions, but things that people start to throw over the fence that push your thinking and accelerate your ability to see what's coming. So I say socialize it, but having shared this story before, it's been helpful to say, like, what does that mean? So here's a narrative of how that might go. Like, put yourself in it. But okay, we know the crisis is going to change some things forever. And so there are certain topics that are critical to our success. So we picked a topic, and then we brought together a group of people that had a really good range of perspectives. And together we created scenarios to try to understand the range of possibilities of how this was going to unfold. And we bracketed them so that we had a worst case and a best case. And then together we looked at all the disruptive forces that might have an impact on this. And finally, we landed on kind of our realistic scenario, how we see this unfolding. And here's where we landed. We saw this, and we saw this, and we saw this. And so now we could have some discussion on that. And just the flow of that is confidence inspiring and may inspire others to do this. And it inspires conversations about how the world's unfolding. And it's incredibly helpful when you're in crisis trying to get ahead of the curve. Okay, so you did all that. Now what? Well, pick another one, because there's probably not only one topic. And also, this sort of thing is really helpful for your team. It helps shed noise, and it helps keep everybody aligned, and it helps you be much more agile, and helps you come out of the gates way faster than a competition. And finally, on top of all of that, if you get into a rhythm of doing this, you're literally building into your culture a discipline for executing on the horizon one stuff, but thinking way out into the future and connecting the two. And if you're doing anything that involves transformative innovation, this is critical. It's critical for you to come out ahead of the competition. So way to go. So that's kind of the whole story, and that's sharing one. And I'm going to end it with a call for help. If you know others this would help, or if you want to help others do these kind of things, chip in with Recast. It's all just about helping entrepreneurs with this kind of activity to get ahead of the curve and come out of the gate strong. So we're going to share one, but I'm just going to skip back over. Bill, did anything come up that I sort of rabbited on? So two things. Did anything come up in the Q&A, or is there anything you'd like to speak to that I just covered up?
Well, the Q&A with the best reaction was Thomas really liked that you are 8 crises old.
It's pretty old.
It's pretty old, yeah. It's pretty ancient, man.
Also, it shows you can live through these.
Well, I think that's the positive way of looking at it. When you get over the part about not wanting to be so old, but we can't do much about that. But we certainly can, realize that you come out the other side. And I think that's the biggest part of this is there was a shock that we went through. Then there was all of those steps as you identified. But then it's like, okay, so what are we going to do now? And I think that's what's super important.
Maybe we'll go through one and share that. So we share an actual output, and you were involved with this. So just jump in anywhere, and then we'll just chat about not just what came out of. Well, let's just do it, and we'll talk about like sort of the experience as we go. Okay. So I showed the topic earlier about conferences and events. And so we do these on all sorts of topics, like whether it's supply chain or blockchain topics, or what, it can be any number of topics. And so this was on conferences, and it actually started as virtual meetings, and it could have gone with small meetings or conferences. And as a group, we decided let's focus on large conferences, but you could easily do a scenario on smaller meetings as well. I actually think the implications between the two were neat. So, well, you know this part. That's what Recast is about. Really interesting people participating in this, including Vivian, who's part of Startup Week. But so a number of people very involved with running events of different sizes, but large events, and often physical, and then dealing with the changes that are going on with COVID. And so A, fabulous group. B, thank you to everyone in the group. And C, Bill, you are part of the group, so you can speak to this as we go. Yeah. So this is fundamentally how we set the stage. So COVID-induced innovations will rapidly change conferences. Now, if you've been paying attention, you could call me out and go, wait a minute, that's not the topic you said. That's true. What happened is, really at the front end of the discussion with the group, we were talking about the topic to get clarity, and it got adjusted a bit. And that's not unusual when you're running a session. Like, you got to be aligned around what's the topic, what are we focused on here? And this was more relevant to the group, and that's how we adjusted. We picked a 2-year time horizon, and again, I'm just going to emphasize, and we emphasize this in the session. It's not about being right. It's about expanding our thinking to what's possible, so that we're quick to sense it and quick to adjust. So I'll jump right to it. Okay, so here's our realistic scenario. Now you know we bracketed, and I'm going to show you the optimistic and pessimistic later, but I know you all want to get to the punchline anyway. So here we go. So by the end, and it took us a couple hours, okay, so here we go. So although it's coming under control, I'm 2 years in the future, okay? The pandemic is still with us, and virtual events are still going strong. So there was this consensus view that, like, it's not over, and we didn't go back to physical events. And in fact, the level of engagement with them is really good, which surprises a lot of, like, no one saw that coming. And physical events are coming back, but the scale of them is going to be a lot smaller, and the attendance is still limited. And this was a lot of discussion. And what was interesting is with the notion that the ability to attend, it ends up getting reserved for a smaller subset of the population, partly because it costs more to host these things because they're smaller and you got to keep them safe. And partly because somewhere in there, even to get people to come, you had to make it a more premium experience. And so maybe it morphs to become a more premium thing to be there in person. And so the cost is part of a status, but also the fact that not just anyone can go. You have to be able to demonstrate that you're healthy enough to go. And those two factors have made it the in-person event kind of a status symbol. And so I'm going to do several pages of this, but you'll see the little things on the right, the little call-outs. So this is kind of facilitator's notes. There was a lot of discomfort around what I just read there. Everyone in the group really disliked the idea that in the middle of Black Lives Matter and protests for equality and whatever else, we're landing on a conclusion that actually this is going to be a status thing. No one liked that. And I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Bill, but it was a real discomfort.
There was a lot of back and forth at the beginning, and I think, even just defining whether or not it was going to be, what kind of remote events. And I think, what I was going to say earlier is, here we are. We're talking about events, and here we are in this event, and we are we're living through this. So as you said, there's a snapshot in time, and things are developing. But I think that there's a lot of value into that. That's why I think my comment would be there was so much value in people working through what were the things that you wanted to talk about. Like, for instance, I'm not a events guy, but we do lots of events and we participate and we put them on, but that's not my core job in life. So I'll have a different perspective than people who do that all for their living. So it's having the diverse group, I think, is really super important. And then, being able to then sort it down or narrow it down into what are we going to actually get through in the session is super important. But it's all building relationship, and I think that's what and allowing it's part of the process is the results, and all of the artifacts are great, but part of the going through the process is just as important.
So a couple really key points there too, because I think one of the things that I'd really like to highlight that you just talked about was the voices around the table. So if you're the entrepreneur, this is your company, you're the CEO, you've decided to take this on, being really selfish about the voices you bring around the table. Who do you invite? And the notion that you want to invite this range of different perspectives. Exactly as Bill had said, I just wanted to shine a light on that. I think that's super important. And yeah, the discussion of, what's the topic we care this much about and how do we articulate that topic is critical, because all the comments and all the discussion are related to that topic. So you got to get that right. So there you go. Okay, so that's the first part of this. I think the total piece we're going to do is like 4 or 5 pages long here. So just to give you a feel for what's going on. Okay. So then moving along with the realistic, so virtual premium events that offer this higher level of engagement or some sort of uniqueness. Okay, this is the virtual part, okay? That maybe emerges as the new middle class. So not the in-person, but the virtual part, but a unique part of that virtual part, So these are the notion that what do we do that's really special? What's the premium virtual experience? And that actually, over the next couple of years, everybody could see that growing and becoming much more, a lot of innovation coming to that, and that literally becoming a material revenue source for conference organizers. And, we talked about things like the home kit, the stuff that, here's the bottle of scotch we all got, and we're having the tasting, or, that kind of stuff, or, behind the scenes, meet with the stars things or whatever. And so this idea of a premium virtual, I think it was almost unanimous that what we were going to see is kind of a wave of innovation in virtual events. And Bill, you called us out. Here we are. We're in this event. We're not doing anything very innovative, and it could be a lot better, and it should be a lot better. But we don't have that yet. But if you go a couple years into the future, is this way better? Is this way more compelling? Is there, maybe you could have been in a more, premium version, and the idea was, yeah, that probably comes up. And then the notion that conferences, this was a really interesting discussion. They will increasingly include an asynchronous stream. So think about it. This is being recorded, and they'll say, here's the recordings. But where the discussion went was, yeah, that's okay. Sure, there'll be a library of recordings, but couldn't the asynchronous stuff actually seed community and forum and interaction, and couldn't innovation come to that? And that fueled a really rich discussion. And it often, these things, there's a unique idea, and you get this whole sort of side discussion that happens that really broadens your view, and again, makes you more sensitive to seeing what's unfolding in the world. So again, Bill, I'm going to stop there before I go to the next page and ask if you want to add anything to that.
I think you'll jump into it as we, in a couple of the other slides. Some of the things that we were talking about are starting to manifest. So a lot of it around the technology, and a lot of it around innovation for meetings and events. And so I think that it's super interesting to me that we can hit something like this, not sure how it's going to work out, speculate on how the future might play out, and then you start seeing it actually playing out in real time. And so some of the things that we're talking about here that went, oh, that would be great. You start seeing them seeping into some of the new technology that's coming along. So again, it's an iterative process. We come out at the other end, but we're improving as we go.
Yeah, and when topics are really, really critical, it's common to hold additional scenarios on that same topic as you learn. Yeah, and you don't always do that, but it's common. Okay, so let's keep pushing along. So this is still the output. This is still where we landed. Okay, so new technology is driving much of the optimism in the events space, and a hyperscaler has entered into the niche, and they're bringing the best of social matching and the things that were originally done for dating and social networks move into these virtual conference space at a global, very kind of well-funded, high-speed way, impacting both in-person and virtual sides of the events. And again, you see my little call-outs. There was almost a genuine sense of surprise when the hyperscaler idea crept into the discussion, and I think there was a sense that, wow, that actually could happen. It's so big and so important and such a center to network things. I mean, why isn't LinkedIn already really big in this? And so there was this really interesting discussion that I don't think anyone came into the scenario with it on their radar. Maybe tangentially, but it became a really rich area of discussion. So then carrying on here, so these new discovery engines, they aid in matching connections and creating new network opportunities. And most importantly, the serendipitous encounters that you used to get at a personal event. Like you go to a physical event and you meet people, and that's the magic of a physical event. We got in this whole discussion that, oh my goodness, if you brought the best of, Tinder or Bumble or whatever, and kind of hyperscaler quality innovation, you might literally make virtual events better than physical events at meeting people and serendipitous conversations and so on. And that was like a wild discussion, really kind of a really energetic discussion. And the idea that in addition to like discovery, these new platforms probably really improve the audience interaction experience. And we talked about things like maybe game things and survey things, but even stuff like, you could imagine the audio from virtual reality, so ambient sound, where unlike this where it's just broadcast, a person could whisper in another person's ear or things like that. Like the tech is there, and if we bring the innovation, there's the potential for amazing shift in a 2-year window. I found this particular discussion so really kind of rocked everything. I don't Bill, thoughts?
Yeah, and I'm not. I think one other point to be made is that while we're talking in a particular scenario, people who aren't in events or aren't, we're all going to go to these events, and it's super interesting. But another view of looking at this, and this is really, I just want to bring it up, that you see the way that this facilitated new ideas and how things could play out. That's what you should be thinking about if you're an entrepreneur or you're looking at the future, is use these scenarios to go, well, that's what would happen in my world, where suddenly, I do events and now I can see all this great stuff coming. But then what about a different world? So doing these scenarios really bring this out. And as John was saying, you really start to get into this extrapolating on top of somebody else's idea, that what about this and what about that and what about these other things, and that's really part of the power of these, and so the ability to not just stay narrow and not just be looking at something that's obvious, or else giving yourself some hope to do it. I mean, it's great. So I just want to bring that up as to relate it to your own situation, whatever that might be.
Yeah, thanks. That's so important. And I know it almost feels like we're just talking about events, but I'm trying to emphasize what happened on the side too, to try to help with this idea of what you could expect if you did a scenario on a topic that mattered to you. And what you come to expect is things that someone says that spark a discussion that brings new things to your view of the world, that actually sensitizes you and accelerates it accelerates you ahead of the competition. That's kind of the point of the whole thing. So, and the last one on the realistic, and then we'll kind of jump past the others because we'll share this with anyone who wants it. But this idea that this trend towards virtual and sort of the limitations on who could attend and sort of the broader reach and inclusivity will increase the diversity and the quality of content and the sort of a whole notion around greater equality and accessibility. And it was a good discussion, but to be honest, I really didn't land with, is that really how people in this group think it's going to go, or is that how we hope it's going to go? And so I only mention that because you don't know, and you got to read through the discussion. But I did think it was super interesting, that sort of last paragraph, that the best venues will invest heavily into the technology and innovation and integrate the physical and the digital, and the best organizers are going to form deep relationships. And the reason I wanted to point that out is, like, okay, we're doing this scenario. We don't know how it's all going to turn out, but boy, you can land on a high confidence on that. And if this was your business, this is actionable. You would start looking for the venues that are doing this, and you would start to try to get a preferred relationship, because you can see how the arrow is going to fly here. And so I think there's a really compelling opportunity there. And I'll just do this and I'm going to come back, Bill. So then we went through a whole pessimistic scenario, which I won't drag you through, but other than to say it got really dark. And then we did an optimistic scenario, which, to be honest, wasn't wildly more optimistic than the realistic with this group. I mean, where we landed is kind of where they think it's going to be. And that can happen, just depends on your topic and your group. Anything to say on that, Bill?
No, but I'll extend out your point about the partnering and how these things are going to play out, and then you say, well, what does that mean to me if I'm not in events? But you think about it, we all go to these events, and there was, like, if you've worked in a company, it's always like you have to justify, why am I going to go? What's the value to the company to get this? And then the company looks at it and says, well, it's marketing and I've got awareness. So this becomes a new channel for your marketing, for your product, for your communication, and all those things. So this general idea about what our event's going to look like can have you help define what your strategy is going to be going forward for your company or for the company that you're working with. So these things, you think about them as being, oh, there's such a impact, no more events, we can't travel, we can't, all this, and then you go, well, what's going to happen? And then we're going to get into this new world, and it's just another way of accessing some new ideas and not doing the same old, or not expecting the new normal to be the same as the old normal, because it's never going to work that way. And I think, just reiterating a slide that John showed earlier in the presentation.
Well, I actually want to expand on that, because if I was in the event business, I would use this as thought leadership. Yes, I would be sharing one-to-one with various stakeholders in my world, but I literally would be sharing this openly and using it as a platform to kind of build my brand and awareness. And so, Bill, you and I are not in the events industry, but just like, I don't know about you, but I've probably discussed this particular one at least a dozen times, and I've learned things, and you and I have had side conversations of things we've learned that had all sorts of tangential benefits. I mean, how many times did you share the fact that we did this one and here's some of the insights?
Well, yeah, and again, it's a jumping off point. That's what I guess I'm trying to get to when I was saying before that you don't necessarily have to be around, just, oh, well, this only applies to people putting on big events. But like you think about, again, for if you're in HR, or if you're in marketing, or if you're in product development, or if you're in any of those kind of things, this is, what does the new normal look like? How are we going to come out of this? And I think those are, this sparking these ideas and looking at these scenarios. It could be like this, it could be like that, but here's how, here's the middle ground, and then acting on it, like what John's talking about. It's something that's actionable. That's not just waiting for it to happen.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to encourage, we're moving through, and we're going to chat a little bit about how we use these in real life, so we'll expand on that. But I'm going to encourage everybody to just think of a topic they might use, and if you want, like, throw it out in the Q&A session, and let's get a bit of feedback on that topic, and try to get you to a topic that really matters for you, that would be appropriate to invest a couple of hours and then get the outputs and use it in all these different ways. But so anyway, not going to do the detail. We got the realistic thing. We did a pessimistic one. We did an optimistic one. As I mentioned before, I tend to like to start with optimistic, then do pessimistic because you've completely gone to extremes, and then come to a realistic. There's no, it's not locked down. That's just my experience. That's what's worked the best. And we ended up having to do pessimistic first in this one, and got dark. But then we came out in a good place. But here's the punchlines. We've done all this stuff. It's not that complicated. When you do these, it reduces the uncertainty and the noise, and that will speed up execution. And then when you share these, it has an unbelievable impact on building and accelerating relationships. And then the side benefit is you get sensitized to things, and because you're sensitized to them, you will see them, accept them as possible, and be more agile than you would be if you hadn't had the conversations. And that's why you do this. So here's a case in point. So we've shared the one about the events. Like a week later, I'm in a discussion, and I'm sharing this at a high level with somebody, not in the event business at all. And this person says, "Oh, have you gone to go look at Brella?" So I pull up Brella, and what do I see on their homepage? Intent-based matchmaking powered by artificial intelligence. Now, first of all, I wouldn't have gone to Brella if I hadn't shared this scenario. Second of all, I don't think those words would have meant anything to me. But it hit me right between the eyes because of all these discussions. And now it's like, where else can this be used? So I just wanted to point out, like, this stuff is real. It's rubber hits the road stuff. Well, so you can add there something if you want, Bill, but otherwise I was going to shift gears because.
Yeah, just for a second, because and we'll go right into it. But we were going through the material. You had that slide in there, and then I just signed up for LA Blockchain, and they're using Brella. They were using Hopin earlier, and now they're using Brella. So again, just to reiterate your point, the going through how they do that was quite interesting. And now we had a frame of reference to look at that and understand what is it that they're trying to accomplish. And we've been talking to folks around how our event's going to start to play out. And so it's quite interesting. And that's why I made a little bit of a point earlier to say there was, we're in the middle of this, and we took a snapshot a month ago. In that month, technology is starting to move. So this is not standing still. I think that's my point.
Yeah, I haven't even told you this, but I was in a discussion the other day, same idea. A discussion that came back where you're like, whoa, that connects to these ideas. So the discussion was to do with Google Meet or whatever they call it this week, and their captions and how good the captions are getting. And one of the people talked about a virtual event where they ran captions on everything, ran it through an NLP engine, and did sentiment analysis. And you can't do that in a physical event, but they were doing that in real time and sharing it with participants. And you're like, okay, there's an innovation on the virtual side. Yeah. So it's just interesting how it goes.
Well,
so, yeah,
John, our AI resource who has a hearing problem has a special program to do the captions, and now is using Meet or Hangout, whatever it's called, because there's no need to. So all of this stuff is just a moving target.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask a couple questions, and we're going to move to any questions anybody wants to pepper us with. But so full disclosure, like we collaborate together on E2D, so I know some of the background, and so these are loaded questions. But tell us a little bit about E2D, because where you live, the world you live in, is totally transformative. And so give us a bit about that and who you work with, and then why you use scenarios, like in the context of E2D.
Sure. So E2D stands for enterprise or entrepreneur to distributed or decentralized. And fancy way of saying it came out of a lot of work done in blockchain. That's where it started. And so what we discovered is that there was a lot of challenges of communicating between enterprises and the entrepreneurs. So the entrepreneurs are typically maximalists and go, well, just put this blockchain in, just use the DLT, use all of this technology, and just get rid of whatever you have, and the world will be perfect. And the enterprise is more, well, we're not going to do that, and we'll try it out.
Well, no.
Right. We'll dip our toe in and all those sort of things. So there's a communication between those two groups that we try to bridge. We believe that the world is moving to a distributed world, to a decentralized world, that the centralized top-down is not working, and it's not just technology, it's really socially, that we're seeing people are either getting together and in a decentralized way and putting consortia together and ecosystems that help one another to make the world a better place. And they use technology to do that, and they use a lot of other scenarios that we can talk about that would fill in around that. This is not just a tech play. So we work with companies that on the my background's a lot of startups, and so one of the challenges, not only do they have a challenge in the communication to who ultimately needs to be their customer, which is that enterprise, but they have a challenge just articulating their vision, articulating their ability, like what do they really believe in, and this is really John's core expertise, is being able to draw out that higher vision. And when you're pulling that out of these companies, when you're getting them to articulate it and you're mapping that out, what is their massively transformational approach to the world? Why do they think the world is changing? You need to be able to show where the world is going and what the world could be moving towards. Because if you can't articulate that, then you're not going to be able to bring people along with you. So we use these scenarios in what does the future look like? Like, how do you think this is going to play out? So we work a lot with these companies to get the strategy right, to get their messaging right. And it's interesting because we're talking entrepreneurs, and we did this great a full week with them with an accelerator out of Santa Monica. But then we go back to the enterprise side, and you still have people in these enterprises who see the future changing. They want to be able to articulate that to the rest of the organization. And it's extremely difficult because the organization is not as flexible, and they're not open to these things. Like, it's like, sit down, shut up, and just get back to work. And so you need these scenarios, or we use the scenarios as a tool that's potentially able to articulate what does the future look like. And as you've noticed, hopefully, as we've gone through this, it's the conversation, it's the idea exchange, it's the things that build on top of one another that really are powerful in being able to bring people along and be able to articulate the future, and then get people to open their minds and to actually buy in and start going, well, what if we did this? And suddenly you start seeing a lot of progress.
Okay, can I tease that out a little bit though? Because there's something inside that message, and I want to make sure that it's clear. So there's one, like, you can do scenarios and just share the output like we just talked about. But I think you're referring to trying to mix who's in the room and actually using scenarios, not just to learn and push your thinking, but to actually build the bridge into enterprise and into your big customers. Mm-hmm. So that almost makes it a biz dev tool. And I don't want to go, oh, it's all theater and it's a biz dev tool. It's not. It's about getting your trajectory right so that you end up thriving. But on the other hand, why not use it as a biz dev tool as you're going?
Well, I think it's a great point, John. And again, if we think about a decentralized biz dev, I'm not necessarily just trying to sell you something. I actually want you to engage and collaborate. So if I want you to do that, I've got to be able to articulate what this new world looks like. And that's how I can bring people along. It's rather than, again, that I'm right and you're not, or you just don't get it. I can remember back in the internet days, we were totally arrogant about it and saying, oh, you just don't get it. If you don't get the internet, you don't get it. Well, you didn't get it one day either. So, you've got to bring people along.
That was like 4 crises ago.
We've forgotten about that one.
God, you're old. Okay, I'm really mindful of time, but I do want to ask one question. So we get how you're using them to cross fertilize and push thinking. And I really wanted to tease that out because I think it's super important. But you've also just invested a lot of time and effort into trying to help with creating and sharing Recast and being in things like this. And why are you doing this?
Well, I mean, we don't want to get too Pollyanna about it, but it's that paying it forward. It's contributing to the community. It's providing help where there's not necessarily a direct return from it, but there's always benefits to it. So I not only enjoy the collaboration and the understanding and all of that, we're helping companies to figure out what their world, their future is going to look like, and how they should move along. And I remember, John, when this all came up, back in and that seems how many crises ago, back in March when this all hit, and we went, well, what's one of the best things to do to help these companies through, and not in a, oh, now I can take advantage of it. It's like we all need to get through this together, and there's a sentiment around that I want to do whatever I can to make sure we don't lose, which is, we've got to flatten the curve. We've got to worry, let's all look after ourselves so we can look after everybody else. And that's really where Recast came from. And this isn't, we didn't know how long this was going to last back then, but we had a couple months of shock. And then we started going, okay, well, whatever it is, we got to get back to work and we got to start moving with these things. And now we're seeing that, the noise has calmed down, but we still have companies that are trying to envision what the future looks like. And these scenario planning using Recast and having it open source and being able to be available is again, a huge benefit. And we don't know how it's going to play out in terms of, oh, will I get more business as a biz dev and that? We're not doing it for that. We're doing it really to connect, and because we think that that's really the right thing to do.
Yeah, that totally resonates. So we're gonna switch to the Q&A, but I'm gonna highlight one thing just that you just said, because it is unusual. So I'm 8 crises old, which obviously cracks up more than just me. But this is the biggest, and what I mean by that isn't, I don't mean scale so much. I mean virtually every entrepreneur on the planet is forced to adjust their strategy because of what's happening. Not just this country, not just this region, virtually everyone. And so as entrepreneurs, I just would shine a light on, we're talking about scenarios and what a good tool it is, but in these periods of crisis, if you're better than your competitors at reading the tea leaves and adjusting, you win. The whole goal here is to come out of this stronger than ever, and that's how you do it. So there you go. Anyway, are there any questions we should go through? Does anyone want to test an idea? Do we, how are we doing? I think we've talked enough. Let's try to be helpful.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the chat. We've got some comments, but no questions. And people should think about what John was saying, where if there's if you're in an organization or you're in a group or you're part of something that you think would be a useful topic to take through Recast, then by all means let us know and let's talk about it, because you can go up to the site and download the stuff and do it yourself. We can help you do that, or have a conversation, see what is there a hybrid way of helping out.
I think one of the things I just see in real life is sometimes there's just a topic that's just so central, like you got to figure it out. And so then that's good. You should do that, and you should put the right voices around the table. Sometimes it actually comes from the different angle. It came from the angle that Bill was alluding to, where everyone in our space is going to have to figure this out. Let's stand up the topic and invite some potential customers or key influencers and do it that way. I think that's legit. I mean, especially if the spirit that you're doing it is, let's share that and help as many people as possible. But it can be really a powerful tool.
Yeah. And actually low impact. I mean, to get a potential customer or a partner or an area that you want to learn about, or maybe you want to get a job, or maybe, whatever it might be, showing that incentive and showing that, that you're going to say, look, I want to help folks figure this stuff out, and I want to be a part of it, is a very powerful thing to be able to do.
All right, we're getting no questions, Bill. Come on.
Where?
Come on, Bill. Make the questions come in, Bill. Or top arrow, or if anyone just wants to share something they've come across.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, like we wanted to communicate it, and we'll cut everybody loose, and that's all good too. Like,
Yeah.
I think we've shared the thinking, and that was our goal.
Okay.
I don't know if I think I do have. I want to bring up the last slide, just because it has the website on it. So it's recast.world, and we've done our best to populate it with things that share some scenarios, that literally how-to videos, the templates, everything's there. Again, it's not about making money, it's about sharing, right? And by all means, you should go there and grab things and run these yourselves, or reach out to us, and we'll be happy to kind of help guide you through that as well.